it's weighing in a lot of different factors.
Let me add into that. I mean, there's two things I have to look at. There's the actual technical vulnerability, and then there's the real business risk. And so when I look at some of these vulnerabilities that have been disclosed in the media, I have to really weigh it against what's the real risk to the business. And something that may be blown out saying, oh, this is horrible, could be very little risk to the business, and something that could be underwhelmingly reported could be a great risk to the business. So it's not just looking at the technical vulnerability, but understanding how it really is going to impact you. And I don't think it's a science to that. I think it's more like an art. You really have to look at a lot of factors and really try to make sure you understand your business.
I'll add on the vulnerability, on the CV vulnerability database side of things, more on the coordination side of things. I'm not sure what percentage of issues are disclosed where both the researcher and the vendor have coordinated. It's fairly good, actually, probably 30% or more. But the quality of information rapidly declines if you have only one of those parties disclosing issues. Many vendors, either intentionally or unintentionally, don't release certain critical details that may be useful for defenders to build IDS signatures or vulnerability scanning checks or things like that. On the flip side, if researchers go find issues, don't coordinate with the vendors before they make announcements, well, one of the key problems there is that the patch isn't necessarily available, but their perspective is also limited. They may not have a full understanding of, for example, all of the affected versions, all of the affected product lines, and so on. And so there's a challenge where the quality of the information coming out is going to vary widely, but not all information is available either, even after the point of disclosure. So you can wind up having new information coming in on a fairly regular basis. And that gets challenging for us on the database side to maintain and monitor. And I can imagine, John, on the customer side that you're often dealing, are you missing this information when new updates come out, or do you have to go in and more or less waste time to go and look for these updates? How do you manage that?
Well, sometimes we do get the updates. Sometimes I have to go fishing for additional information. Most of the vendors we deal with are pretty good at reporting to us any of the issues, but some vendors not so good. It's going to vary.
I think you also have to realize where you're getting your information from, and John's situation where you've got upper management is reading media articles. If you're using that to get your information about vulnerabilities instead of from your vendors, it's kind of like getting your antivirus information from your yoga instructor who sent you a chain letter. Not very reliable. So move on. So this is kind of the fun that OSVDB and MITRE has to deal with of vulnerability database management, and I'll let you guys you start on that, Steve, because we had a long discussion about this yesterday. Sum up your talk in 5 minutes.
Some of the talk. Well, we monitor a number of different sources, bug track, mailing list. Those of us in this vulnerability database industry, we also all monitor each other as well, which makes for some entertaining or not so entertaining issues when somebody somewhere makes a mistake and the exact same mistake is replicated across 5 other databases, which is always a little embarrassing, but it also gives you a notion of how much sort of sharing occurs. Each database has basically a different set of references or sources that they monitor, whether they pick it up by subscribing to lots of different email lists. In the case of CVE, we do it almost entirely by web scraping. I know OSVDB, Brian Martin seems to have a penchant for going and looking at really sort of obscure locations that no one else monitors and yet picking up a whole bunch of vulnerabilities there. One of the big challenges, though, in managing this is that you have many different sources that are all reporting the same thing, but they might not be reporting the exact same thing quite the same way. So you often wind up with an apples to apples question. Am I really looking at the same, these two vulnerability reports? Am I really looking at the same vulnerability or not? As an end consumer of these vulnerability databases, you might not necessarily have to think about that too much. Hopefully, if it's something critical, it's got a CVE in it, and so if the CVE numbers are different, it's reasonably safe to assume that, okay, they're probably different, and we have to maintain and do a mea culpa when duplicates do come out, and there's a lot of different factors involved in that. But it's a full-time job for multiple people to monitor all of these different reference sources and to sift through them and understand what's going on and figure out if things are important enough or not. In the case of CVE, we average about 7 or 8 references per CVE identifier. And each reference could represent anywhere from 2 minutes to 20 minutes of analysis. So even just the process of adding a reference is a big labor-saving device for the consumers of this information. But which sources you look at also directly impacts what vulnerabilities wind up being disclosed. And that's one of the benefits, I think, of this sort of almost incestuous relationship between all the different vulnerability databases where we all watch each other is at least the cream of the crop still kind of floats to the surface, and not a whole lot gets missed.
Actually, Steve, we were talking a little bit yesterday about how you have to summarize some of these vulnerabilities, and I find I manage technical content, and the challenge lots of times is to be dealing with engineers and technical people and trying to take their information and turn it into something understandable content. So,
yeah, I mean, a disclosure could be as short as a product name and a single URL, demonstration URL exploit, or it could be a fully functioning 300-line multi-stage exploit where the researcher might have given a label of, buffer overflow. But if you actually go and you look and you read the exploit, you're actually leveraging 3 or 4 different pieces, separate vulnerabilities. There are language problems. Terminology is not necessarily particularly good, or at least varies widely. The people who disclose issues are not necessarily, there are all different kinds of motivations, and some people who disclose issues are not necessarily disclosing them so that people can fix those issues. And so certain critical bits of information may be missing, or may wind up being inconsistent between different sources. And so CVE and the other databases have to put in quite a bit of work in order to even just summarize these things in a way that's going to be useful to the end users, generally sysadmins or security professionals, so that they can understand what the issue is without bogging them down in too many details. But you have to sift through the details to even get to that point of being able to do the summaries.
Carole, did you have anything to add to this?
Yeah, to go to Steve's point, he did bring up that, trying to monitor a whole bunch of different reference points can get quite tedious at times. From an OSVDB standpoint, of course, we reference CB, and I feel like we have a good working relationship with them. There's a lot of different other types of sources that we're looking at, though, too. Not just news articles, but as Steve mentioned, Jericho goes out and does fresh meat change log entries, and some of these can go into the dozens and dozens of pages across multiple versions, just to pull out details for 1 or 2 vulnerabilities in a really obscure software package can literally take a couple of hours per vulnerability.
Then there was this whole voting machine kick.
Yeah, the voting machine. Steve had the confidentiality, integrity, availability, and democracy risk in all of the voting machine descriptions. But really, part of it too is knowing your target audience. You have to look at your system engineers, your system administrators, your security analysts, and what are each of them looking for? From a security analyst standpoint, I might be looking for what is the specific fix, patch, upgrade, or solution to a particular problem. That might be my primary focus, where from a system administrator perspective, you might want to know specifically which versions were affected and where the information is to download all the patches to get them ready for deployment into a production system. Sort of going back to what Steve said too about the workflow and the overload. You'll get a lot of researchers who will go across specific types of software packages, and they'll find one thing in one package and then go looking for similar packages and try to find the same vulnerability across those. In his Firehose talk yesterday, he mentioned ROT, and ROT was doing one specific exploit, cross-site scripting or SQL injection across one software package. And then he figured, well, I can go out to SourceForge and I can download a dozen other software packages. I bet they have the same thing. So now, instead of just one vulnerability in one software package, you have to look at the same type across multiple software packages. And it gets to be fairly time-consuming So we try to boil that information down into a one-stop shop